Through Weight Loss by Hers, you can give yourself something to be excited about in 2025. You can spend the new year in control of your weight by losing up to an average of 9 pounds in your first month. This is based on data that real Hers customers have reported based on their personalized compounded GLP-1 treatment plans. Hers is transforming women's healthcare by providing access to affordable weight loss treatment plans, delivered straight to your door if prescribed. Hers offers a holistic weight loss program with personalized solutions, including compounded GLP-1 weekly injections, featuring the same active ingredient as Ozempic and Wegovy or oral medication kits. So if you've been struggling with your weight loss journey, it's time for you to find the best option that works for you through Hers. Start your initial free online visit today at forhers.com/KKC. That's FORHERS.com/KKC for your personalized weight loss treatment options. forhers.com/KKC. Hers weight loss is not available everywhere. Compounded products are not FDA approved or verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. Restrictions apply. Wegovy and Ozempic are not compounded. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased.
You can't always see bad weather coming, so it's essential that you're able to see through it when you drive. Michelin wiper blades with advanced technology hug your windshield like a Michelin tire hugs the road, channeling away water, snow, and ice so you can see clearly. Drive confidently and breathe easy. Michelin Wiper Performance. Clearer than ever. Upgrade to Michelin Premium Wipers today at your local auto parts retailer.
The amazing Kate Casey.
Welcome back for another episode of Reality Life with Kate Casey. Just before Christmas, on December 21st, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 took off from London's Heathrow Airport on the second leg of its journey to New York City. At 7:03 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the Boeing 747, known as Clipper, Maid of the Seas, leveled off at 31,000 feet. Just north of the England-Scotland border, an explosion blew up a basketball-sized hole in the fuselage. The bomb, which was located in the forward cargo hold, detonated near the left wing. Power went out instantly, and the plane began to break apart, plummeting, raining debris into the small town of Lockerbie, Scotland, with residents in the path. When the fuel-laden wings and a section of the main body crashed into one house, the subsequent explosion created a 155-foot-long crater and sent a fireball shooting up into the sky. One policeman reportedly compared it to the mushroom cloud from a miniature atomic bomb. The couple that owned that house died, as did 9 neighbors ranging in ages from 10 to 82. Homes up to 75 yards away lost their roofs, and those even further from the blast had their doors and windows shattered. Pieces of the plane came down elsewhere in Lockerbie as well, causing dozens of fires. The crime scene would ultimately be 845 square miles. 270 people died. The 259 passengers and crew included citizens of 21 countries. Among them were 190 Americans, including 15 active-duty military personnel and 10 veterans. 25 were Syracuse University students who had been abroad for the semester. 11 were deaths on the ground. Now, those that had last-minute flight changes, shaken. Among them, actress Kim Cattrall, Motown greats The Four Tops, and Sex Pistols lead singer John Lydon. With terrifying suddenness, 270 people were gone, and it remains the worst act of mass murder in British legal history. Families of the victims demanded answers. Many testified before Congress. In May 1990, a presidential commission declared in a scathing report that the U.S. civil aviation security system was seriously flawed and had failed to provide the proper level of protection for the traveling public. In an attempt to remedy these safety concerns, Congress passed a bill in October 1990 that, among other things, established training standards for airport security personnel and guidelines for notifying passengers of credible terrorist threats. President George H.W. Bush called it a living memorial to those whose lives were so cruelly cut short. Prosecutors would later indicate Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi would not submit that he and his agents in Malta allegedly concocted a bomb made of Semtex, a plastic explosive, and hid it inside a radio cassette player in a Samsonite luggage. And then they placed it in a suitcase and sent it unaccompanied on that December 21st, 1988 flight to Frankfurt. And from there, according to prosecutors, it went to London on the first leg of Pan Am Flight 103. Pan Am was faced with numerous lawsuits and a federal fine of $630,000 for violating security rules. In early 1991, it declared bankruptcy and then ceased operations within that year. U.S. and Scottish prosecutors charged Abdelbasset Ali Al-Megrahi and Layman Khalifima, both allegedly Libyan intelligence agents, with executing the attack. Libyan leader Gaddafi at first refused to turn them over, but a deal was eventually worked out in which they went to trial in the Netherlands under Scottish law. Only Megrahi was found guilty. He was incarcerated from 2001 until 2009, when the Scottish authorities, believing he would die within a few months of prostate cancer, released him on compassionate grounds. Proclaiming his innocence to the end, he finally succumbed to the disease in May of 2012. Now, 2.5 years prior, in March of 1986, the U.S. and Libya fired on each other in disputed waters off the Libyan coast. The following month, a bomb went off in West Berlin disco, popular with American servicemen, killing 2 soldiers and a Turkish woman and injuring more than 200 others. Having intercept communications that purportedly implicated Libya's government in the attack, the U.S. responded with airstrikes. We believe that this preemptive action will not only diminish Gaddafi's capacity to export terror, it will provide him with incentives and reasons to alter his criminal behavior, U.S. President Ronald Reagan said at the time. In 2003, Gaddafi and his regime accepted responsibility, but not guilt, for this attack and agreed to pay $10 million to the family of each victim, which was later reduced to $8 million. And in return, sanctions were dropped and the U.S. restored full diplomatic relations. However, before Gaddafi's death in 2011, his former justice minister told a Swedish newspaper that the Libyan leader had personally ordered the Lockerbie bombing. Now, there have been several theories that have abounded. Some have theorized that Iran played a role in retaliation for a July 1988 incident in which a U.S. warship mistakenly downed an Iran airplane with 290 passengers aboard. And in the new scripted series Lockerbie, A Search for Truth, Dr. Jim Swire, the father of a Flight 103 victim played by Colin Firth, shares this belief that an Iran and Syrian-backed group, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, the PFLP-GC, were the actual parties responsible. Now, there have been several documentaries about Lockerbie, including the Lockerbie bombing on Paramount Plus, Lockerbie, The Unheard Voices, and After the Sky Fell on Lockerbie on Amazon Prime. Lockerbie is an upcoming British television drama series that will air on BBC and Netflix this spring and will focus on the 2 investigations by British and American governments into the bombing carried out on Pan Am Flight 103 and the subsequent explosion over Lockerbie. Now, my guest today is retired FBI Special Agent Richard Marquise. He initially led the FBI's Pan Am Flight 103 investigation, participated in the Locker bombing documentary, as well as several others. In fact, Suits actor Patrick Adams will play him in the Netflix series this spring. Richard Marquise is a retired FBI agent with 31 years of FBI service, including over 20 years as a manager and leader of squads and FBI field divisions and 14 years of experience in law training law enforcement officials from 30 countries, including Albania, Kenya, Lebanon, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Serbia, among others. Between 2002 and 2016, he served as an instructor for the Department of Justice State and Local Anti-Terrorism Training Program and was its director from 2010 through 2016. This program was responsible for providing pre-incident terrorism prevention training to state, local, and tribal law enforcement officers in the U.S. He is also the author of Scotbom, Evidence and the Lockerbie Investigation. Here is my interview. What a pleasure. I've tracked you down. It took a bit, but I found you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
So tell me the first call that you get in relation to Lockerbie. Where are you and what is happening at the moment where you get a call that you have to come and help with the investigation?
My recollection was, this happened at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Washington. So I was at work, and I was working in the counterterrorism section in 1988. And we started to hear rumors. I mean, this was before everybody had a television and CNN on all the time. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have that instant news that you would get today if something like that happened. But we started to hear rumors around the section that an American airliner had crashed, and then a little bit later, an American airliner had crashed. Well, by the time it was time to go home, 6 o'clock, it's 11 o'clock at night in Scotland. There was not a lot of information coming about what it was because the Scots didn't know what it was initially. They thought it was a military plane that had crashed. So nobody really understood the enormity of what happened that night. I remember it being a discussion, and I'm sure there were some people maybe in our operations center that were getting information, but there was no indication of terrorism. It was a plane crash. So I think that in terms of the counterterrorism section on the night of the 21st, probably was not a high priority. It's a horrible thing. We didn't have a lot of detail until early the next day when the Scots went out. They started to see the enormity of the crash, found out it's a Pan American aircraft with 259 passengers and crew. And then we knew some people in Lockerbie had been killed as well. And it seems to me that it was about lunchtime on the 22nd when I was out having a Christmas lunch with a friend, and my pager went off. And I was asked to come back to the office because we needed to start talking about what was going to happen in the event this turned out to be a crime and turned out specifically to be a terrorist crime. But we didn't know. We started talking about, well, we're going to treat it as such. We're going to treat it as a crime. We're going to treat it as terrorism, even before we knew, because there were several claims one by an Irish group, a couple others by some Middle Eastern terrorist organizations claiming credit for causing this airplane to crash. So we were starting to suspect the very first day that it may have something to do with terrorism, but it would not be proven until around Christmas Day.
So at what point do you fly to Scotland?
I didn't go to Scotland initially until March. In 1988, the FBI's jurisdiction in working counterterrorism cases abroad, up until 1984, there was none. If there had been an airplane crash in 1984, the U.S. government wouldn't go investigate. There was no violation of the law. It would all be happening in that country, wherever it was. The Congress passed two bills, one in 1984, one in 1986, that made it a federal crime, a U.S. federal crime, to kidnap, because of all the kidnappings that were going on in the Middle East, and then to kill or injure an American during the commission of a terrorist attack. So the Congress gave the jurisdiction to the FBI that if the Attorney General certifies that this was a terrorist attack, the U.S. government has the right to collect evidence and the right to get them arrested and brought back to go on trial in the United States. That does not mean we would go into a country and usurp their authority. It was intended mostly for places like Lebanon, Iran, places where no justice was going to be meted out to anybody. So we reserve the right to collect the evidence. But in a case like Scotland, that has a Western police force, they have the right of first refusal. If they said, oh, we can't do this, we don't want to do this for political reasons, we would ask permission because we don't have authority there to go do. We have to get permission of the host country. So what happened, it was determined on, I think it was the Christmas Day or the day after, that it was a bomb that brought the plane down. They found a fragment of a baggage container, and forensics people examined it and said that we believe that a high-powered explosive brought this plane down. And again, no real evidence of terrorism, but suspicion. So the FBI requested, through our legal attaché in London, permission to send liaison agent. We sent one to Germany to coordinate the investigation because the flight that had come into London had come from Frankfurt. We sent agents to London, and we sent, in addition to our forensics people, we sent one liaison agent to Lockerbie. Today it would all be done differently, but that was this was a new type of investigation, if you will. I mean, we worked cases overseas before, but this was like the first big one. And I don't know that, in fact, I do know the FBI made a lot of mistakes in the early days about the way we did this. But I've often said if we had sent over a senior manager, which I recommended after this was over, if we sent over a senior manager in the first couple of days and he or she decided that they're going to say, I'm in charge when you're clearly not, you send the wrong person, it would take the right person. I said, I think we would have had a lot of failure, particularly in the early stages. The young guy that we sent over, he'd only been in the Bureau a few years. He was a perfect person. He was not threatening. He didn't try to take charge. He was not a supervisor, but he was great about getting information, and he had the great ability to transfer it back and forth so that the information sharing flowed very well. I went over to the very first meeting in Lockerbie in March of 1989. And we met with the Scottish police, with the German BKA, and somebody from SO13 in Scotland Yard from London. And that was the very first meeting, because at the first few months were very frustrating because the evidence is scattered in 845 square miles.
Crazy.
So when you think about somebody goes into a house because there was a homicide, that's your crime scene. You can search it in a couple days. You can get all your evidence. You can get it tested. You can get it done. But when you have evidence, because the plane blew up at 31,000 feet, and you can imagine that debris, it's planes traveling at 500 miles an hour, and the debris falls from 31,000 feet, it's scattered in this humongous crime scene, and largest crime scene in history. So the collection of evidence, even the chief constable thought he could get it done in a week or two. They were still searching the fields 2 years later, looking for evidence. Now, a lot of the significant evidence was collected early on. But then the other problem you had so much stuff. How do you decide what's important and what's not? I mean, this was all new. It's new to everybody. A bomb on an airplane, bringing the plane down over this huge area. The other bombings on aircraft, most of them fell into the ocean.
Well, is that kind of the intended idea that if it does fall into the ocean, there will be no evidence? So is there something to that it was maybe exploded preemptively?
That was a thought. The normal routing from Heathrow to New York is they turn west almost after leaving Heathrow, go out over the Irish Sea, go across Ireland, and then come to the United States. This night, the wind was blowing at about 100 miles an hour from the west to the east. So the pilots were told, you need to take a more northerly routing. So rather than go hard turn left out of London and go across the Irish Sea, across Ireland, they said, stay above England. So they flew north in England. And then when they got into Scotland, they were given the command to turn west, just over southern Scotland, and they were going to go west. And literally that airplane would be right like near Iceland, Greenland, and make this big loop because they said it would take less time. The wind was not as strong going that way. And it was going to, I guess, consume less fuel. And I've been on some of those flights where we've actually had to stop in Gander and get fuel because of the wind being so strong. So I can see how they did that. And we've always said that we got lucky, because if that airplane had gone out over the ocean, we would never have found any evidence. And as it was, the airplane, it literally was coast to coast, from the west coast of Scotland to the east coast, where they found some of the lighter debris that had blown almost over to the east side of Scotland.
Now, is this because of the fireballs, but also because of the wind?
This was because of the wind, just the 100-mile-an-hour wind in their faces, from coming from the west.
Mm. Now, some have suggested that there were passengers that may have been alive and would have there had been support at the scene of the crime right away, that they would have lived. Is that even possible?
I have read. I read 2 autopsy reports, and they were so graphic, and I couldn't read anymore. It was just awful. And the 2 that I read said these people hit the ground at such a speed that if you were 6'2", that by the time your family got you back, you might have been 5'7". Yeah. Because you're everything compressed when they hit the ground, depending on which way that you hit the ground. Now, when I asked the question, never of a medical doctor, but I asked some of the prosecutors who had read all of the autopsy reports. I said, "Is it possible for somebody to survive?" And they have said, literally, it's not. But I have read that at least 2 people may have survived the initial impact. Maybe it's because of the way where they landed, how they landed. The ground was very soft. I have a photograph of, I don't know if it's a wine bottle, but it's a bottle of French wine, hits the ground from 31. Now, who knows what it was in? May have been in a suitcase and fallen out. But this bottle of wine hit the ground and the bottle didn't break.
Interesting.
Which you think, wow, that's that. But that ground in Scotland is not like we think about in the United States. You get in December, everything's frozen. You're way up north in Scotland, it's got to be frozen. It wasn't. The ground was very soft. It was very soft. In fact, there's a lot of pictures that were taken. You see water sitting in the streets right after December, in December. So you say there's not like it's snow and frozen. The ground can be very soft. But I think a lot of the families, when they asked, I don't know whether they read autopsy reports. I think it's better to think that they were killed instantly, maybe by falling debris or have a heart attack as you wake up. Because it's possible that they blacked out when 31,000 feet, the air is very light. And they may have come to, falling to the earth. I think if I was falling 31,000 feet in the dark, I hope I'd have a stroke or heart attack and go, as opposed to wait till you hit the ground. But I think the real answer is I don't know. Yeah. But I think it's probably more comforting to the families to think that your victim, your family member, was killed instantly because of a lack of oxygen and never came to and died when they hit the ground. I think that's always been sort of the official line about how that worked. But I have read that a couple of people, you think about it again, you've got most of the bodies were close to Lockerbie. They were not that far. But you think about this small town, smallest police force in the United Kingdom, Dumfries and Galloway. And I'm sure they had a couple of ambulances, but when you have no idea where to go at night, I doubt that the people live very long if they hit the ground. But maybe somebody found somebody and that person was alive, and all of a sudden that became a story. I found a living victim. Gee, it's too bad nobody could get here to take care of them. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how long these people lived, if in fact they survived.
My new goal this year is hydration. My days get so busy, it's actually the one thing that I always forget to do. And I love Liquid IV. It is powered by hydroscience, and it helps you break the mold. They've got great flavors, like my personal favorite, the pina colada. Think about how much you are working out. Are you refueling? How much did you actually drink to rehydrate? Liquid IV is leading the way in flavor innovation. They've got a ton of great flavors, including the sugar-free flavors like raspberry lemonade, white peach, and rainbow sherbet. You can break the mold and own your own ritual Just one stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, and always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code KateCasey at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today by using promo code KateCasey at liquidiv.com.
Here's a riddle for you. What do yoga mats, a toothbrush, and a Hyundai have in common? I'll give you a moment. Time's up. If you guessed they're all fun, well-designed, and super useful, you guessed wrong. The answer is you can order all those things on Amazon. That's right. You can now buy a Hyundai on Amazon, the same place where you order yoga mats, a toothbrush, and pretty much everything else, all from the comfort of your home. And the best part? You won't even have to break down a car-sized Amazon box after, because you'll pick up your Hyundai at the dealer. I mean, picture this. You're in your PJs, snugged in on your couch. You just pull up Amazon on your phone and start the process right there. Just locate a nearby dealer, pick your color, your options, check the price, and with a few dotting of some I's and crossing of some T's, voila! Your Hyundai is ready for pickup. It's that easy. Just remember to put on some real clothes before you head over, will ya? Hyundai, now available on Amazon. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details. Limited availability only through participating Hyundai dealers in select markets.
What was some of the most compelling evidence that they were able to get from the crime scene?
Well, I mean, clearly, when you do an investigation, it's almost like you work from the outside in. Okay, so when we think about, okay, what was the evidence we found? And it's almost in the order. The very first thing was a metal fragment made out of aluminum, with pitting and cratering, blackening, indications of a high-powered explosive. And they would later prove that it had, and I didn't do well in chemistry, so it had RDX and PETN, big, long chemical names for components of Czech-made plastic explosive Semtex. So that was found very early on, indicators from a baggage container. Now, the baggage containers in 747 were either aluminum or fiberglass. So this one was an aluminum baggage container. Well, by taking that and looking at all the baggage containers that fell to Earth, they figured out which baggage container it was. AVE 4041PA was the name of and they found it in fragments. It was torn, ripped. The fiberglass ones were broken. They could hit the ground and you could see where it broke off. But the aluminum ones were just bent for the most part because there were some in the front of the plane, some in the back of the plane. When they identified this baggage container where that skid rail came from, that piece of aluminum, they were able to say with certainty that this went on the plane. This is luggage from two places. It was luggage that was interlined into Heathrow earlier that day. So that container was sitting in the baggage buildup area, and it was designated. That container is going to go on Pan Am 103 from London to New York at 6 o'clock. So put bags that come in from Cyprus, from Turkey, wherever else the planes may be coming into London. And then they filled up the bottom layer. And then the rest of the bags in there were the bags that came in from Frankfurt, from the Frankfurt flight. Mm-hmm. So the majority of the bags were bags that came in from Frankfurt. So based on some tests that were done in Maryland in 1989, the forensic examiners came up with a couple of conclusions. They said, this is the baggage container. It was on the second layer of luggage, and it contained less than a pound of Semtex. Well, while they're playing with this baggage container, they find a small fragment. And I'm assuming you've seen some of the pictures.
Yes.
And if you have not, okay. I'm happy to send them to you. But there's a picture of a finger, okay, that shows a circuit board on it, and it's brown. And you look at that and you go, wow, I don't care how big your finger is, you can still see loops and whirls on a fingerprint. You got this little fragment. Well, that fragment comes to a Toshiba radio, a two-speaker Toshiba radio. And of course, that is going to be a clue that the forensics people, because we're going to find other evidence later that is the instruction manual for that radio, some of the black plastic from that radio, piece of the speaker grill, and clothing that was blasted into all of this stuff. So this is going to become significant, but it's going to take time. They also found 54 pieces of a suitcase. So they're able to say, we think that the bomb was in this cargo container, which came from, we believe, based on the forensic exams, came from Frankfurt. We believe, based on the analysis of the fragments of the suitcases, because suitcases, most of them survived. They landed in the dirt. You could clean them up and send them back. Some of them got dented and beat up and broken, but they found 54 fragments of a suitcase, which led, only one suitcase, led the investigators to believe, forensic investigators to believe, this suitcase contained the bomb. So we identified the suitcase as a Samsonite Silhouette 4000, which was manufactured in Denver, mostly sold in the Middle East. So they find the baggage container, the suitcase, and then in the suitcase there's a Toshiba radio, black plastic, two-speaker radio, and in that they think it's going to be an explosive. And they find all this clothing that they could also say, look, we found a bunch of clothing laying at the crash site. Somebody could pick it up and look at it and go, not a policeman, but forensics people could look at it and go, there's no blast damage on that at all. It's not burned. It's not charred. It's not blasted. It's ripped. It's torn. And there's a difference between blast damage and mechanical damage. It's torn because it was ripped on something as it fell. But they could eliminate some of those things, but they also found a lot of clothing. And our first big lead about the clothing was a lot of the clothing they were finding, the toughest part of the shirt was the collar and the label. And the labels and the collar survived, and they had a lot of labels that said made in Malta. So that's going to take us to the island of Malta. And of course, one of the big issues we faced early on when we discovered this was the Toshiba radio also linked to a terrorist cell in Germany, the PFLP-GC. And that cell was building bombs to be used aboard aircraft in October of 1988. And they used Toshiba radio with a barometric timer on it.
Got it.
And of course, we sat here and we had a lot of debates because the Germans said that cell was all wrapped up. We arrested them all in October, 2 months before the bombing. We arrested these people. So we asked, well, where are they? Well, we arrested 16 people, including plus the bomb builder. Where's the bomb builder? Well, we sent him back to Jordan because he was a Jordanian agent working for this terrorist group. Okay, he's gone. Well, where are the two principals? They're still in jail, but the other 16 people all have been released. And we had some issues because that plane blew up 38 minutes after it took off, which is about the time frame that Palestinian, the PFLP-GC bomb, would detonate. It was a barometric timer, and the time frame was between 30 and 40 minutes for the plane to blow up. It was done to defeat the aviation security of 1988. They would do that. It would not blow up on the tarmac, but the switch wouldn't go off until it got above, I think, 20,000 feet, and then 30 minutes later, it would explode. And of course, we're sitting here trying to do this, and the Germans said, well, we think the bomb went on London because that cell was wrapped up in Germany. Plus, why didn't the bomb blow up between Germany and London? And we couldn't explain that. And then all of a sudden, we have this Malta connection. We're starting to find out, we get a baggage record from Malta that shows there's a lone bag with no passenger put on the plane in Malta to Frankfurt. It's designated for Pan Am 103. And we go, wow. But we had another problem. If it's that Palestinian bomb with the barometric device, why didn't it blow up between Malta and Frankfurt? And then it didn't blow up between Frankfurt and London. Had to have gone on in London, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a barometric bomb. But we would later discover, by looking at all this one fragment of cloth, another fragment that's smaller than the one I showed you on my finger. And it's a fragment to a timer called MST-13. And the MST-13 was a timer built in Switzerland by a Swiss company. And it solved our problem of how many times the airplane went up and down, because it was not a barometric device. It was straight timer. You set it for a particular time and it's going to blow up. But we were able to prove. And I know this is probably the most, it's an easy case as I think about it,
right?
But it's very complex because of the number of characters, the people, and I didn't even go into, the media in January, because it's like today. You look what's going on in New Orleans. There's this, senators and everybody. We want full transparency. We want to know what went on. We want to know what happened. We want to know this. We want to know that. They want to know everything immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Lockerbie was no different. And everybody was screaming and hollering, who did this? Who did this? And the CIA did an assessment. They said, based on what we know, the PFL-PGC in Germany did this. Not based on any evidence. They based it on their, and all the intelligence agencies said, we assessed the PFL-PGC in Germany somehow managed to do this. That was their intelligence assessment based on what they knew. So it's in the media. And in January, this man walks into the United States Embassy in Vienna. He says, I've been reading. He says, I want to meet with the ambassador. The ambassador is not available. So he writes a letter. And in the letter, he doesn't sign it. In the letter, he tells them he's a European businessman, and he was asked to come and tell the U.S. government what he knows. But he said, I have read all this material. I'm paraphrasing. I have the letter if you want to see it too. But anyway, I'm paraphrasing, but I've been reading all this information in the media about the PFL-PGC, this Palestinian group that committed the Lockerbie bombing. He says, I don't think they did it. He said, I think the Libyans did it. And he describes a meeting that he went to in December and he describes all of these people. And it's like I went to a meeting, and in the meeting was, George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice. Okay, I'm sure they all had meetings when they worked in the White House. And so what? And he did the same thing with Gaddafi and all these other people having this meeting. But he threw a few other names in there too that we didn't know anything about these people. Anyway, we get the phone call from the embassy in Vienna, and the guy doesn't sign his name, no contact information. We know nothing about the guy, but he's trying to blame the Libyans. So we stuck it in, put it over here, because there's no leads. There's nothing we can do. We have no access to Libya. We can't go say, let's go cover a lead in Libya and interview these guys. So, and of course, they would not cooperate. Amazing thing was the Russians cooperated a lot. They did a lot for us.
Why do you think that happened?
We probably didn't want planes to blow up. This is sort of an aside story, but we had somebody, I don't remember the origins of all of it, but somebody told us about a flight attendant. This flight attendant for Pan Am was a young girl. She was from Dallas, apparently a very attractive blonde woman. And she had a boyfriend whose father was the Syrian ambassador to Moscow. And he liked to pack her luggage. Well, that wouldn't have been so odd, except we found a piece of her luggage on Pan Am 103.
What?
At Lockerbie. Okay. So that came first. We found the piece of luggage. So we started trying to find out about her. And this was in early January. We tried to find out about her. And turns out she's on extended sick leave and she's staying with her boyfriend in Moscow. So our minds are thinking, okay, Syrian boyfriend likes to pack her luggage. Maybe that is when she leaves Moscow after her sick leave is over. And, so we went through, we had no relationship with the Russians at all. We went through the State Department. We got them to go. The next thing we know, they're conducting surveillance of this woman and her boyfriend. We were getting daily reports about what they were doing. They were out drinking and partying and dancing all hours of the night. So I remember this.
By the way, she's on her sick leave when this is happening.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, she, whether her sick leave ends or Pan Am told her she had to come back to work because we were working with Pan Am security too. They said she's coming back tomorrow. So we made sure that Pan Am station knew about, the security people knew about it. She had to come through Frankfurt. They knew about it. And we were going to have two agents meet her at the plane in New York. And I can just imagine, because the agents called me after they interviewed her. And they said that this girl showed up and he said, she is beautiful. She's about 5'10". She had on a pair of black leather pants, very attractive young woman. And apparently she gets off the plane in New York and guys, FBI, we want to talk to you. And she says, it effing figures. They were checking everything on her before they even let her on a plane. But she said, I got body cavity searched in Moscow. What in the hell are you going to do to me? But we washed her out. I don't know what Pan Am did to her. But she apparently, Pan Am flight attendants would often leave. It was like her makeup kit. It had her name in it. And we discovered she had been on that aircraft. And of course, that's the whole thing about nobody cleans those aircraft and takes all the crap off between flights. But apparently her bag was up in one of she put it up in and maybe the flight attendants have a place, I don't remember anymore, but it was put in one of the overhead bins. And it was like her makeup bag or something like that and had her name in it. But it was the fact that the Russians, and I always felt that if the Russians were helping us, because this was 88 before the Berlin Wall fell. Yep. So if the Russians are helping us, we should expect no more from everybody else. So we got a lot of help. But I sort of digressed from my good friend, Mr. Bollier, that we didn't know who he was when he walked into the embassy in Vienna in January. We had to put that on the shelf. It wasn't until a fragment of this timer is identified. It takes months before we could figure out what it was, because the CIA actually had one of those timers and a photograph of a second one. They had them. They had seized them in Africa, and they had them in their laboratory. So we were able to compare that fragment found blasted in to where the radio manual was, pieces of the radio, and a piece of clothing from I think it was a shirt that was blown into this. Everything was blown into this shirt made in Malta, this company. And I'm fast forwarding to late 1990, so 2 years after the bombing. We have a magistrate's hearing in Zurich, and we interview this guy. Well, it's all conducted in German, so we had a German-speaking agent there. And I don't know that either he conveyed it right, but we didn't quite understand. But the Swiss called us a couple of weeks later and said, we got some pretty interesting news you really need to hear. Apparently, Mr. Bollier, the guy that made the timer, during the magistrate's hearing, he said, I made 20 of those. The Libyans asked for them in 1986. I made 20. We tested some of them blew up. But he said, I cannot believe you found me because of the fact you found this fragment in this big crime scene. I thought you found me because of the letter I wrote and left at the embassy in Vienna. And we all went, it's you. You're the guy that walked in 1989 and said, I don't think the Libyans did this. Then he proceeds to tell us that the Libyans contacted him in mid-December. We're looking for some more of those timers that you built for us 2 years ago. And he didn't have any. So he went out to the Walmart, bought some Olympus timers and puts his company's logo on them, flies them to Libya and tries to sell them to the Libyans. And they turn him down. They said, we've already got what we need. We don't need that anymore. Oh. And he comes back. He was supposed to be on the flight that brought the bomb bag out of, this is kind of really unusual, but he left a day early. He had a reservation on the Air Malta flight that had the bomb suitcase in it the next day. And he flew back a day early because they dissed him. But and then, of course, when it came time for trial, the Libyans paid him millions of dollars. So his story's changed. Oh, I sold some of those to the Stasi. They really weren't the right ones. And because we said there were 20 of them, only 20. You know, he gave all of them to, he never sold them. He gave them to them. They were supposed to be prototypes.
Why? But why did he put himself in this position?
He was a businessman. You know, what he said was, I've been doing business with Libyan military and intelligence for years. Now, let's turn it around. As an American, we have a Defense Department that I'm sure does business with 10,000 companies in the United States. All right. Now, if you own the XYZ Corporation that makes bolts, and that bolt is used specifically to make a warhead on a bunker bomb. Now, do you think that the guy that you are going to sit there at night and go, you know, that bolt that I make, it's a small piece, but I sold it to the Defense Department. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but maybe they'll put it on a bunker bomb, but maybe it'll put, the medical stuff together. So we'll be taking care of people. Well, I think Beaulier justified in his mind that I'm making things for the military and the intelligence people. They're not going to go do something bad with it.
Right.
Well, yeah. Military people, they don't get paid to do nothing. I mean, you understand my point. So I think if everybody that did work with the Defense Department started saying, oh, I don't want to hurt anybody or kill anybody, and maybe what I make, this small component, maybe I shouldn't make it. But I think Beaulier said, this is my business. I've been doing business with them. He did a lot of communication stuff, but he made these timers for them. They asked him to manufacture a timer. He made it. It's apparently very sophisticated. And he built, and it's only about this big. It's a very small timer, maybe 2 inches square, if that. It's in a box, and it would very easily fit up in the radio if you take some of the components out. But the radio still worked. If you were to have plugged it in or they had batteries, turn it on, it would work, even with the Semtex and the timer in the radio.
So there are conspiracy theories, namely Dr. Jim Swire even has one that is really the center point of the scripted series about Lockerbie. For those of you who worked diligently on this case for many, many years, and even in looking in retrospect, do you feel frustrated about that?
Well, I don't, because sadly, you'd like to think that I think I know, we did everything we could do during the course of the investigation. If we had a lead, just because something said, well, maybe you should go this other way, we didn't let that other lead go. We would try to finish it out to make sure that we did everything to prove that's not what happened. We didn't abandon. There were some people that said, as soon as we got on to the Libyans, aha, it's a new thing, we'll blame them because, and one of the issues had to do with the first Gulf War, because there was a belief that the United States government and the British government collaborated to get Assad, the father of the current deposed president of Syria, to get Hafez Assad on the side of the West, so he would not deny our support when we go into Iraq. There was a big belief that we would change we investigators who are professionals, would do something political to say, oh, you don't want us to go there? You want us to find somebody else guilty? Sure, we'll do that. It never happened. And unfortunately, there are some people who believe that we would, and maybe we did. And what I've often said, that if Margaret Thatcher and George Bush came to an agreement that maybe we better not look at Hafez Assad's group anymore, they forgot to tell us about it, because we followed the evidence. We followed it. The other issue had to do with Reverend Mosey, who lost, I think, his daughter, and Dr. Swire were at a meeting in London. And I believe he said it was a politician from the United States who said, my government and yours, saying the United States and Britain, know who did this, but they're never going to tell you. Well, nobody's ever been able to say that was so-and-so. I've never heard a name, because I'd love to go back and ask this person, did you say that? Why did you say that? What information did you have that would lead you to believe that that we would, number one, lie about what the evidence was? And that's why I firmly believe, and I'll go to my grave believing the evidence as it is. We followed the evidence. We didn't, most everything that, I'm sorry, but the conspiracy theorists bring up, it's intelligence. It's you can assess that. You can say, I think, just like I commented about the original assessments done by the intelligence agencies, PFL, PGC, and I can see how anybody reached that conclusion. But the evidence didn't support that. And that's why law enforcement, for the most part, we don't go make final judgments until it's time to make a final judgment. And our final judgment was the indictments in November of 1991 that said the evidence led us to believe that these two Libyans, supported by others that are either unnamed or we know who they are and we're not going to say their names right now, supported this, because there's not evidence to do that. But we have evidence against these two people, and we hope we can collect more in the future against other people, probably from Libya.
Designed for working professionals, Georgetown's Executive MBA features a hybrid format that delivers community on campus and convenience at home. Classes are held in person 1 weekend per month on our Washington, D.C. campus and 1 Saturday per month online, helping you balance work, life, and career advancement. Plus, you'll have the opportunity to participate in an international consulting project abroad with a global client. You'll get to choose from a variety of electives to customize your curriculum based on your interests and career goals. And enjoy the access only Georgetown provides in D.C., with connections to industry experts, global leaders, and influential institutions. It's time to expand your understanding of how globalization shapes both global and local business strategy. Ready to build your legacy as a business leader? Earn Georgetown's Executive MBA. Explore the program at msb.georgetown.edu/EMBA-podcast.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, Gaddafi never admitted guilt, but there were fines paid. And then there was a minister who said that shortly before Gaddafi died, that he was at a meeting where Gaddafi was part of the plan that was hatched for the bomb. Do you believe that's true?
Well, I don't know. I know that when that's I can tell you why I think Gaddafi paid the money and when he paid it. Because I remember this day like you remember a lot of different things, 9/11, and I'm old enough to remember the Kennedy assassination, but not Lincoln. So that one I don't know.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I was in Dubai in a hotel when Ambassador Bremer stood up at a press conference and said, "We got him, Saddam Hussein." They found Saddam Hussein in a hole in Iraq, and he was brought out, and he went and he was hung. Well, I have no doubt that Muammar Gaddafi was watching something at some point, and he knew the United States just got Saddam Hussein. Well, let's think about this. They never found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Saddam Hussein has never, to my knowledge, conducted a terrorist attack against the United States or the West. Okay, there have been some individual things that he may have been blamed for, some people, but there's no evidence that Saddam Hussein was behind any terrorism against the West. But you look at Gaddafi. I mean, his agents were convicted in the UTA bombing in 1989 over Chad, Africa. By the time that Saddam Hussein was arrested, Megrahi had already been convicted in court. So he's had agents in two separate airplane bombings. We believe strongly that he had weapons of mass destruction. And less than a week later, that's when he came and said, "Okay, that's it. I'm giving up my weapons of mass destruction. I denounce terrorism, and I'm going to pay." And yes, he didn't fully admit responsibility, and I'm still ticked off about that to this day. I did write an op-ed to the Washington Post, and I said I'm incensed that our government allowed him to get away with such a weaselly worded statement where he said, "I accept responsibility for the actions of my agents." And people have said it's not an apology.
Right.
Gaddafi was on it'd be similar to a Zoom call at Georgetown about 15 years ago, and I attended. It was held in a auditorium at Georgetown, and they were going to allow Gaddafi to be asked questions, and we were allowed to submit questions that were not asked by us, but they were asked by a student. And I asked the question of Gaddafi. I said, and I remember the question. It said, "You had agents convicted for UTA bombing. You had an agent convicted for the Pan Am bombing. When are you going to accept total responsibility and apologize to the victim families?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget that. I was watching him as the interpreter is saying these to him, and he kind of looks and he's, my son. It was a young man that asked the question. Yeah. My son. Lockerbie is a closed case. We need to move on. And this young man allowed him to get away with his answer. But a professor got up and challenged him. And Gaddafi sort of beat around. He was never going to answer the question. Okay, you did this. Apologize. Yeah. You want to be accepted in the West, you should apologize. And he refused to do it. And it was very offensive, but it was interesting. But people like Gaddafi never did things just because they felt it was the right thing to do.
Right.
There was pressure. The pressure seeing what happened to Saddam Hussein. He didn't, although unfortunately for him, his own people did it. But it didn't happen because the United States invaded Libya and did that to him.
So all of these years that have passed, and you're sometimes asked about this case, has your opinion about anything changed over the years? Like you had mentioned earlier that you feel like the FBI made some mistakes in the beginning. Now that you look back after a career of 30 years, is there anything that you would have done differently as an investigator?
Well, you can always say it's Monday morning. I'm going to look back. When this was over, when this case was initially indicted, my day-to-day responsibility and activities changed. I was no longer responsible for the case because we said that we're stuck. All the rest of the investigation that needs to be conducted has to be done in Libya. We can't do it. We have no diplomatic relations. We're not going to go. And it was not until 1999 when the Scots, when Gaddafi turned over the two suspects, went to Libya and conducted investigation. But I did two things. I sat down and I drafted, with the help of the rest of everybody on the task force, what do we need to do? So there was a template left behind for everybody, which I think is a good idea to do in any major case. These are the things we didn't get done. This is what needs to get done if somebody goes. And I believe that they turned that over to the Scots when they went, or at least gave them the information from it. The other thing I did was I wrote an after-action report. And I was critical. I was critical of the FBI. I was critical of me. I was critical of how we managed the case. Not so much how it was. I think investigators did a really good job, what we did. But we made some missteps. And some of the missteps, one of the first ones that I suggested was that when you have a major case just like this, you take a senior official and you send them to that scene, because it's usually too big for a field office. Now, this one was really unusual because there's no field office in Scotland. You had to have sent somebody over there to manage the case and do this from day one, all the time. Somebody needed to be there, but it's got to be the right person. Would I have been the right person to go in December of 1988? I'm not sure. I think the FBI did that part right. They sent a guy that was no threat to them. So it took them a while to figure it out. But I think that when I was given the responsibility to oversee the entire case, because initially my responsibilities from headquarters were to manage the overall investigation, but not direct it. I know that sounds confusing. Field offices do our investigations. I managed the whole thing, but I did not direct the resources. Those were directed at Washington field office. But a year and a half or so in, it was recognized that that didn't work because I had access to things that the field office didn't. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we made some internal missteps. And when I was sent over, I was told your chain of command has changed. You work for that state special agent in charge, and the person that is your reviewing official is the assistant director. But I spent all my time in Bob Mueller's office. Bob Mueller was the guy that I spent most of my time talking to, and he wasn't even an FBI person then. He was the deputy attorney general in charge of the criminal division. Bob Mueller, and it's really funny, I remember meeting him when he took that job because he came over and we briefed him. And the day that I was, okay, you are in charge of everything. You got, and there were a lot of issues, relationship issues, lack of communication issues. And like, you got to go fix all these things. And my assistant director is the one that said, assistant director of the criminal division, he said, I can't think of anybody else other than me to go do that. And, they called me and they said, are you willing to do this? And I was getting ready for a promotion. And I said, I'll step back from the promotion and I'll do this because I feel connected to it. And I didn't know if I could solve it, but I said, I learned a lot by sitting back and watching other people make mistakes. And, I can remember calling people and I could suggest things to the Washington field office and they ignored me sometimes. I was just a headquarters guy. And anyway, I spent a lot of time building relationships. And I had somebody mention to me one time, well, I can't believe that because I was critical of the early stages when the communication wasn't great between Washington and Lockerbie. And I had somebody tell me, but I called there every 2 weeks. And I said, I said, 2 years later, I said, I'm talking to them twice a day.
Yeah.
I said, that was, and I said, the other thing, well, I remember walking into the agent in charge's office and I said, I need to go to Lockerbie. He said, what for? Do we have a meeting? I said, no, that's the problem. The only time that we ever meet is when there's the big meeting and we eat food and we drink and we pat each other on the back and we set up the next meeting. I said, anybody ever sat down and had a one-on-one strategy session? What are we going to do? And I said, that's what I need to do. And I went over and I sat down with Stuart Henderson, who was my counterpart in Scotland. And I was nervous. I mean, I'm in my early 40s. I'm a pretty senior guy. I've been in the FBI for almost 20 years, or pretty close to 20 years at that point. But I was still nervous. Stuart was senior to me age-wise. He was a detective chief superintendent, which is pretty high up in the police. And I went over there and I was nervous about meeting with him because I said, I don't know what he's going to say. Well, as I told a lot of people, I said, Stuart and I jogged in the heat of Washington, in the frigid cold of Sweden, in the rain of London and Lockerbie. I've been to his house. He's been to my house. Our wives know each other. Our kids know each other. When Stuart died, I went to his funeral and carried his casket. I told him, I said, Stuart, you were never this heavy when you were alive. That casket weighed a ton. But I went over, I spoke at his funeral. Stuart was like a brother to me. But that was the relationship that I knew I had to build with him. And now, do we agree on everything? Nope. We had a lot of disagreements, including the night before the indictments were announced. But Stuart and I never had a physical fight, but we had a real knockdown, drag out argument when we were in Malta because he did something that I didn't agree with. And I told him, I said, what you did, I said, that was wrong. I disagree with what you did. But we also knew that at the end of the day, we were going to come together and we were going to do the right thing. We talked about that because as much as we may have disagreed, we agreed on one thing. Absolutely, positively, that attack was an attack on the United States of America. It's not an attack on Scotland, even though that's where the evidence was. And I also agreed, Stuart, you're in charge of this investigation. I'm a support figure. And I'm telling you, you can have all the resources of the United States government because I can get those for you. And there's some things I can't tell you that we did. But when if I could write all those things that we did, people would go, wow, moving fleets, satellites. I mean, we did a lot of stuff that, unheard of. I don't even know what it cost. I never wanted to know. But we did things to support what we were doing during the course of the investigation. And I feel really, really good about what we accomplished. I wish we had accomplished it sooner.
Yeah.
I wish that it didn't take 3 years. But the reality is it was good that we did because we're able to flush out all of those other things that the people like Dr. Swire, the Iranians did this because they were upset because we shot down the Airbus and killed 290 people. Yeah, I understand that. I can see why they would believe that. But the evidence doesn't show that. Now, I can't say that someplace in the bowels of the Iranian government is a document that says, we're still ticked off about this shooting down this airplane, but we don't want our fingerprints on this. So we're going to go to some other terrorist group or country, and we're going to have them do this. But I've often thought, and I didn't know much about Sunnis and Shiites and all those relationships in 1988. I've learned a lot more about them. I find it hard to believe that a Shiite government would go to a Sunni government and say, hey, folks, how about helping us out? I know the enemy, the enemy of my enemy. How's that work? The enemy of my enemy is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or so. The phrase that I may hate you, but I'm going to use you because this guy's worse than you are. So we're going to go after you. But Lockerbie, for whatever the reason, 36 years later, is still of interest to the world. And I'm glad for a couple reasons, because I've often said that the model that Lockerbie eventually used of taking assets from the intelligence side, taking assets from the law enforcement side, internationally, putting them together. We work very closely with the CIA, with MI5, things that never really happened before. I remember Stewart, we had a meeting at the CIA, and Stewart walks out, we're in Langley, and I was impressed because they let us park right like in the executive parking lot. Usually I show up there and they say, your parking
back
space
there.
miles the other side of Route 123, but they would let us park. And so we walk up and Stewart says, I cannot believe that Stuart Henderson, a humble Scottish cop, is allowed to come into the hallowed halls of the CIA.
Wow.
I'll never forget that. And that was, I went to MI5. I don't think I ever went to MI6, but MI5 used to often host lunches for us when we were in London. But when you bring all those assets together, you collaborate, you share. And of course, I read all the things or see them on TV today about New Orleans. And how come this guy wasn't on the radar? There are 7 billion people in the world. It's tough for everybody to be on everybody's radar.
Sure.
But when you do have the big goal, prevent these things from happening. And the big goal today, if you can't do that, you got to come at it hard and arrest the people and incarcerate them for doing what they did.
I'm grateful for your 30 years of service.
31 and a half.
31 and a half, yeah. And while raising a family too. I'm really grateful for your service. Thank you for all that you did in this investigation and continue to do afterwards. A pretty phenomenal career.
Well, my career, I think, just ended after 60 plus years, only because I don't think I want to take on any more major tasks. Although if maybe somebody called me, I'd probably come running, but I don't think I want to do. I got to give my wife all the credit.
I think your wife would be very annoyed at you if you did that. But maybe there's a book in you. Maybe there's another book.
Another book. I don't know. The first one it took me a year to write it, a year to write it, another year to get the FBI to approve it, and then another year to find a publisher, and no comment after that about my publisher, but that's another whole. I've learned a great deal about the publishing world that I probably would not do certain things the same way again.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
The amazing Kate Casey.
I want to thank my fantastic guest, Richard Marquise, and remind you to click subscribe, leave a 5-star review. Please join the Facebook group, Reality Life with Kate Casey, to discuss this episode and more. You can get my list of what to watch in unscripted TV, documentaries to reality shows by going to katecasey.substack.com to get that list. And you can get more episodes, bonus episodes, by going to patreon.com/Kate Casey, patreon.com/Kate Casey. And finally, make sure that you follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at KatecaseyCA, TikTok, it's Kate Casey, and Twitter and Threads at Kate Casey.
They say Hollywood is where dreams are made, a seductive city where many flock to get rich, be adored, and capture America's heart. But when the spotlight turns off, fame, fortune, and lives can disappear in an instant. When TV producer Roy Radin was found dead in a canyon near LA in 1983, there were many questions surrounding his death. The last person seen with him was Laney Jacobs, a seductive cocaine dealer who desperately wanted to be part of the Hollywood elite. Together, they were trying to break into the movie industry. But things took a dark turn when $1 million worth of cocaine and cash went missing. From Wondery comes a new season of the hit show Hollywood and Crime, The Cotton Club Murder. Follow Hollywood and Crime, The Cotton Club Murder on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of The Cotton Club Murder early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus.